Yeah, I hope this isn't too long. We'll see how it goes. I can always skip. So this is the Parsha, and he went out, Vayeitze. I have to say something to begin with. In Kabbalistic understanding and Hasidic mystical teaching, the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob each personify a particular sephirot. And Abraham is unbounded love, generosity. Isaac is restraint and boundaries. And Jacob is the perfect combination, melding of Chesed and Gevurah into Tiferet. And sometimes it says compassion, sometimes it says mercy, sometimes it says beauty. And, it has absolutely nothing to do with the Jacob in the text. It's just not who Jacob is. Okay. So this Parsha for the text begins, he's fleeing Beersheba because his brother Esau has vowed to kill him if he can get hold of him after Jacob has stolen his blessing. Earlier, he had taken his birthright, which would have been his inheritance, his double portion as the firstborn. So Esau's very angry. And where Jacob is being told to go by his mother, actually, is back to his kinsman in Haran. And Haran, you may remember, is where Abraham came from originally, leaving his family in Lech Lecha. And Haran means crossroads. So Jacob is already, this whole setup is, what is Jacob going to do now? And his first night out, he goes to sleep and he dreams of a ladder that's rooted in the earth and goes up to the heavens. And there are angels going up and down. And then God is standing over him, promising him the land for himself and his descendants, just as it has been promised to Abraham and Isaac, the same way. And ends by saying, through you and your descendants, all the nations of the earth shall find blessing. And when Jacob wakes up, he says, God was in this place and I didn't know it. Okay. And that's been a trope forevermore. God is in this place and I don't realize it. I don't see it. I don't know it. Or as Miriam just said, I do see it. I do feel it. Okay. Where I wanted to go was the image of the ladder, because it's a very major, again, image in Judaism, and it's been used through the centuries in different ways and seen in different ways. So in the most literal reading, the one in the text, okay, God, has created the earth and everything in it. God is not the earth. God is transcendent, something other. Our goal spiritually is to be as close to this other as we can be, basically by doing whatever God tells us to do is right. And God has simply appeared to Jacob. And the ladder represents then the possibility of ascending and getting closer to God, to the divine presence, which is he. And in this one, it's he on a throne pretty much. And by doing that, by again, essentially, as was taught by the rabbis, Jacob can ascend and become closer to God by paying attention and letting go as much as he can of the Yetzer Hara, the earthbound part of himself that holds the tendency that all humans have to do evil. And it takes us right back to the original story, of Cain about to kill Abel, when God intervenes and says, hey, sin is standing at the flap of your tent. What are you going to choose? And Cain chooses to kill him. And shortly after that, we have the destruction of all humanity because of our Yetzer Hara, our tendency to do evil. It has other aspects. It has creativity. It has having children, all of that, but it also holds that part. And so that's the basic question of Torah. And as Rashi says also in relation to the ladder, no matter what Jacob chooses, the angels that are going up and down will accompany him and his descendants, no matter what they do. in the promised land, out of the promised land, whatever. The angels will be there with them, because that's the deal. That's the promise. And there are other metaphoric readings of the ladder involving, which I never get, the stages of prayer. There's another one of climbing Mount Sinai to get to the Toyrah. Those are two. But the one I want to really go to is the one in the mystical teachings, which is a very different view then of the 16th century Kabbalistic teaching. And there are different ways this is talked about, but this is a basic one that pretty much everyone talks about. The ladder goes back to, it stands for, okay, so in this mystical understanding, we've got a different view of God. And it's the one that has come down to us much more, even though not everybody by any means in Judaism goes here. But it's the one that says basically, it isn't, the whole world is the manifestation of God. It's not the biblical view that God created the world by his word, but God is separate from the world. In this one, God manifests, takes form as the world. And the latter represent the stages in that act of creation, the act of manifesting into this plane of reality. And so at the top, and we go from the top down, you have, and these are phrases, many of you may know these words, do know what I know, Atzilut, which begins with God's, is simply this formless emanation, whatever it contains. People often experience it as love, actually, but certainly as well as power. So that's Atzilut, just the formless emanation, and then moves down to the next stage of manifesting, which is a kind of blueprint that appears or is created, that appears, which my best understanding is that corresponds to the basic laws of how things work. You know, the basic laws essentially probably of quantum physics, but of physics more than anything. That's my thinking about it. But the basic operating laws, which is Bria, word for creation. And then it goes on to the next level, which is form. I'm looking at it because I never remember the words properly, Yetzirah, which is the taking from the basic laws that are just a blueprint into the actual appearance of forms, which then continue to, as we would say, evolve the forms, but this is the third stage. So this one occurs over time. And the final level of emanation is really the world as we know it, moment by moment existing, constantly changing, but the one in which we live. And in the what then followed from this view is another way of looking at this, which is not about the relationship of God to the world and God being the world, but of how we get to know this, how we get to experience this directly. And so another way of viewing the latter is starting from the bottom up, in which we go inward. So this is no longer a sequence in time the same way. It's a sequence of removing the shells or the onion skin, peeling and peeling and peeling as we go inward. And in this one, in this view, again, we're saying the reality now is that in modern, and this is the modern Jewish renewal movement, okay? This is the renewal movement. There's nothing but God. It's no longer that we're in the image of God. We are a manifestation of God, just as everything else is. So Gail is one flavor of God. Karen is another flavor of God. Sarah is a third. Miriam is a fourth. We're all impermanent forms, temporarily here. Flavors, different manifestations. But to know this, so at the lowest level, and this is what we as what Jacob becomes, Yisrael, God wrestlers, are asked to do. So we first look at, and this is years of one's life. This is one's life if one is doing this. We start at the level of looking at very specific, how do we behave in the world, and with whom, when are we kind and with whom, When are we not? When are we generous? When are we not? And with whom are we generous? Under what circumstances? It's very specific looking at behavior. This is mindfulness practice. And again, that's the world of action. That's the lowest level, asiya. And then the next level, going inward, is looking at our more general inclinations, the forms of our more general inclinations, like what's our general basic kind of, what moves us, what tends to drive us in the way of motivation? What's our temperament? Do we tend to be glass half full, glass half empty? Do we tend to be moving inward, moving outward? What do we have to work with that's kind of fundamental to the form we take? That's Yetzirah. And then the very, very hard work, the uncovering of the most spriya, the really basic operating laws. We're back, the physics of the mind, the basic operating laws that drive us largely out of our consciousness, that are rooted in childhood experience, and particularly not just the bad stuff, but the good stuff as well, but that are so basic to our understanding of how the world works that we don't even know we have these beliefs, no matter what I do, it won't work out, or everything will be fine, good things happen too, but so basic that we don't even see that. And then finally, when we have so cleared away all that stuff, we're now high up on the ladder, and we begin to have the experience more and more of actually knowing that we are simply another form of God. And when this body disappears, doesn't matter. It becomes the waves. We are the wave on the ocean, and we go back into the ocean. It's very hard work, and very few of us make much headway up this ladder. And of course, Jacob, the man who becomes our namesake, he doesn't do any of the work. He really doesn't. He's very lucky. God graces him with his presence 3 times in this chapter. God greets him at the ladder. God greets him at the very in the middle and tells him to go back home. And at the end, he says, God, when he makes peace with Laban, God is with him again. And in between, what we see is a man living his life and not paying any attention to the inner, to what he should be doing, what he might be doing. He travels to his kin, to Laban. He falls instantly in love with Rachel, who is his second cousin. He works for 7 years to marry her. He's betrayed by her brother Laban, who, gives him Leah instead. He works another, and Laban says, it's not the custom for the younger to go before the older, which reminds us why Jacob has fled in the first place, since he's taken Esau, the older brother, all of Esau's blessing and birthright. So there's a little in there, but it's only an oomph. It's not about Jacob saying, oh my, what have I done? Because at the very end, in fact, anyway, so he goes on, he gets Rachel after another week, he goes another 7 years to claim her. He has 12 sons and 1 daughter with 2 wives and 2 maidservants. Nobody gets along with anybody. The wives are constantly jealous of one another, jealous about who's having more children, jealous about who goes to sleep with Jacob. He works for Laban. At the end of this parsha, he complains bitterly about how horrible it has been to work for Laban. Laban chases him as he leaves. They finally make peace. But in that process, Jacob unwittingly places a curse on Rachel, his beloved, and she's going to die, and we know it. And by the way, in his leaving, he gets the best of Laban's herd by kind of magic. He says it's God who does it, but in the text, he does a kind of magical, we don't understand it, ritual, and he gets it. And in the process of doing this, there's a wordplay in here that's hidden on ewes and rams and how he gets what he wants. And one is Rachel, the word for ewe is Rahel, and the word for ram is similar to Leah's name. So he's reminding Laban, you did this to me, I'm doing this to you. Laban did it to him, reminding him that he did it to Esau. It's an endless chain. It doesn't get better, okay? But at the same time, Jacob is, as I said, God comes to him repeatedly. So grace can come to any of us. We can all have this real experience of, no matter what we're doing, of somehow knowing for a moment what is this presence that's always just is. That's what it is. It's always the presence. So Jacob is our namesake, shown in all the nakedness of his ego, okay? But with the promise that God is always awaiting any of us, and the ladder is always there if we choose to climb it. That's it.